There are people in our lives who keep everything running. People who work behind the scenes, who ensure every detail is perfect, who carry invisible weight so that others can shine. And often, we never stop to ask what weight they're carrying in their own lives. For Steph Curry, that realization came on a Tuesday morning when he arrived early at the Warriors' training facility, earlier than normal, early enough that the building was still silent, with only a few lights on in the administrative hallways. And that's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in that place. Muffled sobs, deep crying, coming from the office next to the training room. Steph stopped in the hallway. For a moment, he considered moving forward, giving privacy to whoever was there. But something in the tone of that crying stopped him. It wasn't just sadness. It was desperation. You can sense that you're about to witness something that will change your perspective when even the silence seems to carry weight. He approached the door, knocked gently. "Is everything okay in there?" The crying stopped abruptly. Silence. And then a voice trying to sound composed, but failing. "Yes, Mr. Curry. Sorry. Just a moment." Steph recognized that voice immediately. Tiffany Williams, his executive assistant for 8 years. The woman who literally organized every aspect of his professional life and, often, personal life. And in 8 years, he had never heard that voice break like that. He opened the door slowly. And there was Tiffany, sitting at her impeccably organized desk, face in her hands, shoulders trembling. When she looked up and saw Steph in the doorway, she quickly tried to wipe away the tears, force a professional smile. "Mr. Curry, I'm sorry. I'll organize your schedule." But Steph had already closed the door behind him, had already pulled up a chair, was already sitting beside her, not as employer, but as human before another human clearly in pain. "Tiffany," he said gently, "what happened?" And in that moment, seeing genuine concern in his eyes, the professional mask that Tiffany had maintained for months finally crumbled completely. To understand why that moment would be so significant, you need to know who Tiffany Williams really was. Because her story didn't begin in that office in tears. It began 8 years earlier, when a determined woman got a job that would change her life. Sometimes, the strongest people are those who hide the heaviest battles. Naturally, this leads us to understand who Tiffany was before that moment of collapse. Because people rarely break suddenly. They break slowly, under accumulated weight that no one sees. Tiffany Williams was 32 years old when she was hired as Steph Curry's executive assistant. Single mother of an 8-year-old son named Marcus. Tireless worker who had built an impressive career in administrative management. When she got the position with Curry, it was like a dream come true. Stable salary. Benefits. Opportunity to work with one of the most respected athletes in the world. And, most important, security to raise her son. For 8 years, Tiffany was impeccable. She didn't just manage Curry's schedule. She anticipated needs before he knew he had them, coordinated complex travel, organized family events, dealt with sponsors, media, personal commitments. She was the invisible glue that kept the chaotic life of a superstar running perfectly. Steph trusted her completely. He knew that if Tiffany was taking care of something, it was handled. She never failed, never complained, never asked for anything beyond what she needed to do her job exceptionally well. How is it possible that someone can be so consistently excellent and still be breaking inside? The answer lay in Tiffany's nature. She was strong, always had been. Raised by a mother who worked 3 jobs to keep her in school, Tiffany learned early that complaining didn't change circumstances. Work changed them. So she worked. When she got pregnant at 23, Marcus's father disappeared. Tiffany didn't collapse. She worked harder. When it was difficult to pay for daycare while building a career, she didn't ask for help. She found solutions, worked night shifts, sacrificed sleep, sacrificed social life, sacrificed everything for her son. And it worked. Marcus grew up being an incredible boy. Kind, intelligent, athletic. The pride of Tiffany's life. The reason every sacrifice was worth it. But then, 6 months before that Tuesday morning when Steph found Tiffany in tears, something changed. Marcus, now 16 years old, began having strange symptoms: extreme fatigue, pain, loss of appetite. The doctors took weeks to diagnose, and when they finally did, Tiffany's world trembled. Marcus had a serious medical condition that required specialized and prolonged treatment. It wasn't terminal, thank God, but it was serious and expensive. Very expensive. What's most striking is how Tiffany dealt with it. She didn't tell anyone at work, didn't ask for extra time off, didn't mention it to Steph, because in her mind, her personal problems weren't her employer's responsibility. So she did what she always did: worked harder. In addition to her full-time job with Curry, she took on freelance event management work at night, worked weekends, slept 4, sometimes 3 hours per night. During the day, she was the same Tiffany: professional, composed, efficient. During the night, she was a terrified mother, trying desperately to keep her son alive and safe while medical bills piled up. The health insurance covered part of Marcus's treatment, but only part. The remaining bill? $180,000. An amount that could have been funny if it weren't devastating. Because where does a single mother, even with a good salary, find $180,000? Tiffany tried everything: loans, lines of credit, even started a discreet crowdfunding campaign online using a fake name because she was ashamed to ask for help publicly. Have you ever wondered how much weight a person can carry before they finally break? For Tiffany, the breaking point came that Tuesday morning. She had arrived at the office early, as always, checked emails, organized Steph's schedule, confirmed appointments, the same routine of 8 years. And then she saw an email from the hospital. Final notice. If she didn't pay a significant amount in 2 weeks, Marcus's treatment would be discontinued. Discontinued. As if her son's life were a service that could simply be canceled for non-payment. Tiffany reread the email 3 times, and on the 3rd time, something inside her finally gave way. All the weight she had been carrying alone for months, years, decades of being strong, of never asking for help, of always finding solutions. Everything collapsed at once. And it was exactly at that moment that Steph Curry arrived earlier than normal and heard the sobs through the door. It was impossible not to notice how years of strength can collapse in a single moment when pressure finally exceeds what any human should carry alone. "Tiffany," Steph said gently, pulling his chair closer. "What's going on? And please, don't tell me it's nothing. You've taken care of me for 8 years. I know you. Something is very wrong." Tiffany tried to compose herself, tried to force that professional smile, tried to say she was fine, that it was just a difficult morning, that it would pass. But then, Steph did something that broke her defenses completely. He gently placed his hand over hers and said, "You don't need to be strong right now. Not with me." And those simple words, that permission to finally not have to pretend, brought down every wall that Tiffany had built. And she told him everything, about Marcus, about the diagnosis, about the bills, about working 3 shifts, about not sleeping, about the email from the hospital, about the absolute desperation of not knowing how to save the son who was her entire life. Steph listened in silence, and as she spoke, tears began to form in his own eyes. Because he had children too, knew what it meant to love someone more than life itself, and couldn't imagine feeling that love and not having the means to protect them. Sometimes, the strongest people carry pain that no one sees until they finally break under the weight. When Tiffany finished speaking, there was silence for a moment, ashamed, exposed, waiting for, she didn't even know what. Pity, maybe. Or worse, disappointment for bringing personal problems to work. But what came was something completely different. Steph stood up, not to leave, but to get his own chair and move it so that it was directly in front of Tiffany. And then he asked 2 words that would change everything. "How much do you need?" Tiffany blinked, confused. "What?" "How much do you need? Now. Today. To take care of Marcus. To ensure he gets the treatment he needs. How much?" "Mr. Curry, I can't." "I'm not asking if you can," Steph said firmly but gently. "I'm asking how much you need." It's a lot," Tiffany whispered. $180,000. "But Mr. Curry, I can't accept." Steph was already picking up his phone, already dialing, and before Tiffany could process what was happening, she heard, "Yes, this is Steph Curry. I need to pay the full medical bill for Marcus Williams. Bay Area Regional Hospital. Yes, today. Whatever is necessary." Tiffany froze, mouth open, eyes wide, unable to process what she was witnessing. Steph hung up the phone and looked at her with a gentleness that made new tears fall. "Done. I can't accept this," Tiffany managed to say through sobs. "It's too much. I'll pay it back. Every cent. I promise." "You're not paying anything back," Steph said firmly. "And I'll tell you why. You've organized my life for the last 8 years. You know my children. You're in my house more times than in yours. You've missed countless dinners, weekends, holidays because I needed something. You never failed me. Not once." He paused before continuing. "But more than that, Tiffany. You're family. And family takes care of each other. You've taken care of me for 8 years. Now let me take care of you." And in that moment, Tiffany Williams, a woman who had been strong her entire life, who never asked for help, who always found solutions alone, finally allowed someone to be strong for her. She cried. Not silent, contained tears, but deep, liberating sobs, years of weight being removed from her shoulders, decades of carrying everything alone finally ending. And Steph just sat there, not uncomfortable, not in a hurry, just present. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply being there, while someone finally allows themselves to break and be healed. What would happen next would change not just Tiffany and Marcus's life, it would change conversations about how we treat those who work behind the scenes, about how true greatness isn't measured by achievements, but by how we treat people when no one is watching. And it all began in that silent office, with two people, one offering help that was never asked for, and another finally accepting what she always deserved: to be seen, to be cared for, to be treated as family. Forever. There are conversations that last minutes, but reverberate for years. Conversations where words spoken carry weight that transcends the moment and touches something fundamental about how we live, how we treat each other, and what it means to be truly human. For Tiffany Williams and Steph Curry, that conversation continued well beyond that phone call that paid the hospital bill, because what Steph was offering went far beyond money. It was something that Tiffany had denied herself her entire life: permission to be vulnerable. After the initial tears subsided, Steph didn't rush off to practice, didn't treat it as a task completed. He stayed, asked about Marcus, about the treatment, about how Tiffany really was, beneath the professional mask she wore every day. And for the first time in 8 years of working together, Tiffany talked, really talked. Not about logistics or schedules or appointments, but about life, about fear, about love for a son who was her reason for existing. You can sense that you're witnessing transformation when silences become as significant as words. "Marcus is everything to me," Tiffany said, her voice still hoarse from crying. "When I found out I was pregnant, I was 23 years old, had just started my career. His father, well, he didn't stick around. And everyone told me it would be impossible. Raising a son alone while building a career? Impossible." She paused, wiping her eyes again. "But I didn't accept impossible. I worked harder, slept less, sacrificed everything. And Marcus became an incredible man. Kind, intelligent, hard-working. Everything I did was worth it because he's extraordinary." Steph listened with an attention that few people really give, not just waiting for his turn to speak, but truly absorbing every word. "And then came the diagnosis," Tiffany continued. "And for the first time in my life, hard work wasn't enough. It didn't matter how many extra hours I worked, didn't matter how much I sacrificed. The numbers just didn't add up. And that destroyed me. Because I'd always found a solution before. Always." "Why didn't you tell me?" Steph asked gently. 6 months, Tiffany. You carried this alone for 6 months." Tiffany hesitated before answering. "Because it's not your problem. You pay me well, treat me with respect, offer excellent benefits. I had no right to ask for more." It was impossible not to feel how those words revealed something deep about how Tiffany saw her own value, how she believed that asking for help was imposing, that her needs were a burden she should carry alone. Sometimes, the strongest people need to learn to let others be strong for them. "Tiffany," Steph said, leaning forward, "can I tell you something? Something I've never said out loud?" She nodded, curious. "There are days when the pressure is almost unbearable. Expectations from millions of people. Media waiting for me to stumble. Games where everything is at stake. And you know what keeps me sane? What allows me to focus when everything is chaotic?" He paused before continuing. "Knowing that when I leave that court, you've taken care of everything. My family is safe because you organized security. My children are happy because you remembered birthday presents I would have forgotten. My wife is less stressed because you coordinated events that would have been impossible." Steph stood up, walking to the window before turning again. "You think your only value is doing your job. But Tiffany, you give me something much more precious than organization. You give me peace of mind. And that's priceless." What's most striking is how those words began to recontextualize Tiffany's entire perception of her own value. Because she always saw her work as transactional. She did tasks, was paid, simple. But Steph was saying something different. He was saying that her impact wasn't measured in completed tasks, but in how she allowed him to be his best version. "So, when you ask why I paid that bill," Steph continued, "it's not charity. It's not pity. It's recognition. It's knowing that you gave me 8 years of peace. 8 years where I could be a better player, better father, better husband, because you carried weight that I didn't even realize I had." He paused before adding, "And now it's my turn to carry weight for you." How is it possible that simple words can completely reconfigure how we see our place in the world? For Tiffany, those words did exactly that. For the first time, she began to understand that accepting help wasn't weakness. It was allowing the relationship to be bidirectional. It was recognizing that even strong people need support sometimes. "But it doesn't stop there," Steph said, returning to sit. "Because paying the bills solves the immediate problem. But what about the following months? Years? Marcus will need follow-up, regular checkups, possibly more treatment." He pulled out his phone again. "I'm going to put you and Marcus on my personal health plan. The same one I use for my family. Complete coverage. 0 co-payments. 0 deductions. I want you to never again have to choose between your son's health and financial stability." Tiffany opened her mouth to protest, but Steph gently raised his hand. "Besides," he continued, "I'm increasing your salary retroactive to the last 6 months, because you worked 3 jobs while doing full-time work for me, and that means I didn't pay you adequately for what you really contributed." "Mr. Curry," Tiffany began, but her voice failed. "Steph," he corrected, gently. "After 8 years and sharing this, I think I can be Steph." Naturally, this leads us to the heart of what was happening in that room. Because it wasn't just about money or medical bills, it was about fundamental recognition of humanity, of seeing people behind the roles they perform. "You know what else I'm going to do?" Steph said. "I'm going to visit Marcus this afternoon, because I want to meet the son of the woman who has been an essential part of my life for 8 years. I want him to know he's not a burden, that his mother is a hero, and that our family is here for your family." Those words finally broke Tiffany's last remnant of resistance. She wasn't just receiving financial help. She was receiving recognition of her complete value as a person, not just as an employee. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to," Steph responded. "You've already spent 8 years showing gratitude through excellence. Now just let me reciprocate." Have you ever wondered how much unexpressed love exists in professional relationships that we never had the courage to acknowledge? The conversation continued for another hour. Steph canceled morning practice, sent a message to the coaching staff saying he had something important. Because in that moment, nothing was more important than being present for someone who had been present for him for years. They talked about Marcus, about his dreams of going to college, about how the treatment had forced him to temporarily pause the sports teams he loved, about how Tiffany saw guilt in her son's eyes when he realized how much the treatment cost. "He told me the other day," Tiffany shared, tears forming again, "that he was thinking about skipping college to work and help with bills. 16 years old, and he's already carrying that weight. I failed him." "You didn't fail anyone," Steph said firmly. "You're a single mother who raised an incredible son while building an exceptional career. You're exactly the opposite of failure. You're the definition of success." He paused before adding, "And about Marcus's college? That's also handled. I'm going to create an educational fund for him. Whatever college he chooses, it's paid for. Because he shouldn't start adult life worried about student debt after everything he's been through." What's most striking is how Steph wasn't doing this for public recognition or credit. There were no cameras, no social media posts. It was simply one human helping, another in the most direct way possible. But there's one thing I need from you, Steph said, becoming serious. Tiffany straightened up, nervous. Anything. I need you to start working less. I need you to sleep more. I need you to take care of yourself. Because if the last 6 months taught you anything, it should be that you can't take care of Marcus if you collapse yourself. He continued, So, I'm going to hire an assistant for you. Someone to help with the workload. And I'm going to adjust your hours so you have real time with Marcus. Time where you're not working or worried or exhausted. Just mother and son time. Tiffany shook her head, tears falling freely now. But for the first time that morning, they weren't tears of desperation. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of finally feeling like she wasn't alone against the world. Sometimes, the strongest people need to be reminded that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. When they finally stood up from that room, something fundamental had changed. It was no longer an employer-employee relationship. It was something deeper. Family not by blood, but by choice, by consistency, by being present when it really mattered. Steph walked with Tiffany to the door, and before leaving for practice finally, he turned and said, Tiffany, thank you. She looked confused. For what? For letting me do this. For letting me be useful in a way that really matters. Because in the end, all those championships and records, they're special. But this is what I'll remember. This is what really matters. And in that moment, both understood something fundamental. Greatness isn't measured by how many applause you receive on the court. It's measured by how you treat people when no one is watching. By how you use resources and influence not to accumulate more, but to lighten the load of others. Tiffany returned to her desk, but for the first time in 6 months, the weight on her shoulders had been removed. And when she started working that afternoon, it wasn't with the desperation of someone drowning. It was with the gratitude of someone who could finally breathe. What would come next would transform the private moment into a catalyst for public change. Because some stories are too big to remain secret. And when the world discovered what Steph had done, when they witnessed that raw humanity, conversations about how we treat those who work behind the scenes would never be the same again. Forever. There are acts of kindness that remain private, known only to those directly involved. And there are moments that, by their very magnitude and significance, find their way into the public light. Not because someone sought attention, but because truth has a way of emerging, especially when it touches something fundamental about humanity. For Steph Curry and Tiffany Williams, that private moment in the office should have remained exactly that, private. But 3 days later, when Tiffany went to Bay Area Regional Hospital to finalize payment details, someone from the administrative department recognized the connection between her name and Steph Curry. And when local media received a tip about Curry paying six-figure medical bill for employee, the story exploded in a way no one anticipated. You can sense that you're witnessing something transcending ordinary news when even the most cynical journalists stop to wipe away tears. The first report was respectful. Basic. Steph Curry pays $180,000 in medical expenses for executive assistant. Some details about Marcus's treatment. Brief mention of Tiffany's dedication over the years. But then something interesting happened. The story didn't die after a 24-hour news cycle. Instead, it grew. Because in a sea of news about celebrities doing the minimum for public relations, here was something genuine, something real, something that struck a universal chord. Within 48 hours, the story had spread. globally. Not in sensationalist tabloids, but in respected publications. And the tone wasn't "celebrity does charity." It was "human recognizes another human." Tiffany initially panicked when she discovered the story had leaked. She called Steph, apologizing profusely, worried that he would see it as a violation of privacy or an attempt to gain attention. But Steph's response was characteristically grounded. "Tiffany, I have nothing to hide. I did what was right. If the world knows, let them know. Maybe it will inspire other people to do the same." And then Tiffany made a decision that would change everything. She decided to share her own version, not to gain sympathy, but to honor what Steph had done, to tell the complete story from her perspective. It was impossible not to feel the raw emotion when her 3-minute video was posted. No elaborate production, just Tiffany sitting at home, speaking directly to the camera. "My name is Tiffany Williams," she began, her voice firm but full of emotion. "And I want to tell the truth about what Steph Curry did, not the headline version, the complete truth. Sometimes the truth you don't want to hear is that even the strongest among us need to be saved sometimes." Tiffany told everything. About years working silently, about Marcus's diagnosis, about months trying desperately to keep everything running while bills piled up, about the morning when she finally broke. "And Steph didn't just pay the bill," she said, tears falling now. "He saw me, really saw me, not as an employee or assistant or function, but as a person, as a mother, as someone carrying weight that no one should carry alone." She paused, wiping her eyes before continuing. "He told me it wasn't charity. It was family taking care of family. And in that moment, I realized I'd spent 8 years being part of his life, but never allowing him to be part of mine. Because I thought showing vulnerability would be weakness." What's most striking is how the video resonated. Not just with assistants or employees, but with everyone who had ever pretended to be okay when they weren't. With everyone who had carried weight silently because they didn't want to be a burden. The video was viewed 20 million times in the first week. And the comments weren't about Steph being a hero. They were about people seeing their own stories reflected in Tiffany's. "I'm a single mother too. I work 3 jobs. No one knows. This video made me cry because I know exactly what it's like. My employee has been missing work lately. I was irritated. This video made me realize maybe I should ask if he's okay, not just assume he doesn't care. I've worked as an assistant for 15 years. Always thought showing personal problems would be unprofessional. Tiffany showed me maybe it's more professional to be human." Naturally, this leads us to what happened when Steph saw Tiffany's video. He was at home with his family when he watched it, and when it finished, he was crying too. Not because he was expecting recognition, but because he finally understood the complete weight that Tiffany had been carrying, and because he could feel how that moment of her vulnerability was touching millions. But Steph wasn't satisfied to stop there, because he realized he had a platform. And that platform could do more than just help one person. It could change conversations. It could inspire a movement. So 3 days after Tiffany's video, Steph made his own post. And what, he said, surprised even those who already knew the story. "When the story about Tiffany became public," he wrote, "many people called me a hero. But you're getting it all wrong. Tiffany is the hero. She carried impossible weight alone for months, because that's who she is. Strong, resilient, determined." He continued, "But here's the truth we all need to recognize. Strength shouldn't mean suffering in silence. and people shouldn't have to choose between their children's health and financial stability. How is it possible that one private act of kindness can catalyze conversations about larger systemic issues? The answer lay in how Steph used the moment. He didn't just accept praise and move on. He transformed the spotlight into a platform for change. "I'm going to do something today," his post continued. "I'm going to create a fund for employees of all teams I work with. Not just the Warriors. All employees of all companies where I have influence. Emergency fund for medical, family, personal crises. Because Tiffany taught me, people work for us every day. It's our duty to ensure that when they need us, we're there." And then he made a call. To all CEOs, athletes, people with resources. Look around. See who keeps your lives running. Assistants, cleaning crew, security, cooks, drivers. They're invisible until we need them. But they have lives, families, battles. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until they break. Ask, care. Treat them like family, because without them, nothing we do works. The post had 100 million interactions in the first 48 hours, and more importantly, it started a real movement. Have you ever wondered how much cultural change can begin with one person having the courage to be vulnerable publicly? CEOs began sharing what they were doing for their teams, not in a tone of self-promotion, but in genuine call for others to do the same. A tech founder posted, "I read Tiffany's story. I realized I know nothing about my staff's personal lives. So today I sat with each one, asked how they are, really. 3 were going through crises I didn't know about. We created an emergency fund today." A CEO of a major corporation announced, "Inspired by Steph Curry, we're implementing a $10 million emergency fund for all 15,000 employees, covering medical crises, family emergencies, any genuine emergency, because our success is built on their backs." Athletes began publicly recognizing their own teams. Posts thanking assistants, coaches, travel staff. But more than thanks, action, raises, benefits, emergency funds. Curry made me realize I'm paid millions in contracts, but the team that enables my success barely earns enough. That changes today. What's most striking is how the movement transcended celebrities. Ordinary people began recognizing those who work behind the scenes in their own lives. A hashtag emerged. Hashtag treat them like family. And the stories that emerged were touching. "My babysitter has taken care of my children for 5 years. Never asked about her family. Today I asked. Discovered she has a son in college going hungry because she sends all her money to him. We doubled her salary today and paid for his semester. I've had a housekeeper for 10 years. She's perfect. Never asked if she was okay. Today I asked. She cried. Said her husband is sick. We started a campaign among neighbors. Raised $50,000 in 2 weeks. I'm a restaurant manager. Never thought about my team's lives outside of work. Tiffany's story changed me. I talked to each employee. 2 were homeless. 3 were skipping meals to save money. We implemented free meals and housing assistance. Naturally, this leads us to the moment 2 weeks later when Steph fulfilled the promise he made to Tiffany on that first day. He visited Marcus. The visit wasn't announced publicly. There were no cameras, but the hospital, with the family's permission, shared some photos afterward. And what they showed was pure. Steph sitting next to Marcus's bed. Not posing, just talking, laughing. Marcus, the 16-year-old boy who had been through so much, had a huge smile on his face. He didn't come as a celebrity, Marcus said later in an interview. He came as my mother's friend. And you know what we talked about? Basketball for 5 minutes. Rest of the time, he asked about me, my life, my dreams, my fears, like he really cared. And I realized, Marcus continued, his voice breaking, that my mother worked for someone who really sees people, not as employees, but as humans. Sometimes, the strongest people teach us that real strength is knowing when to ask for help and having the courage to accept it when it comes. Marcus's video was short, just 2 minutes, but the impact was profound. "I want to thank Steph Curry," he said, looking at the camera, "not just for what he did financially, but for seeing my mother, for treating her the way she always deserved, to be treated like family." He paused, wiping away tears. "My mother is my hero, but every hero needs to be saved sometimes. And Steph did that. He saved not just our financial situation, he saved my mother from breaking completely underweight. She should never have carried alone." Marcus ended with something that resonated with millions. If you have people in your life who work silently for you, assistants, employees, anyone, please see them. Ask if they're okay, because you never know what battles they're fighting alone. The video had 50 million views, and the comments were unanimous. This kid understands something many adults don't understand. 3 months after that day in the office, Tiffany appeared on a major morning television program. And when asked what the entire experience had taught her, her answer was simple, but profound. "I learned that asking for help isn't weakness. I learned that truly good people don't just say they care, they show it. And I learned that sometimes, when we allow others to see us vulnerable, we give them permission to be human too." She paused before adding, "Steph didn't just change my life. He changed how I see my value, how I see strength, how I see human connection. And that's worth more than any amount of money." The world had witnessed something rare. Genuine kindness without expectation of return. Vulnerability without shame. Humanity in its purest form. And in the process, conversations changed. Not just about how we treat employees, but about how we see human value, about how we define success, about what really matters. The legacy of that moment was just beginning, and in the years that followed, it would reverberate in ways that neither Steph nor Tiffany could have imagined. Forever. There are moments that define not just individual lives, but generations. Moments that change conversations, that challenge norms, that force society to confront what it values and how it treats those it considers less important. For everyone involved in the story of Steph Curry and Tiffany Williams, that moment in a silent office became exactly that. A catalyst for change that transcended two people. 6 months after that transformative day, Marcus was completely recovered. The treatment had been a success. He didn't just survive, but thrived. And when he returned to school, he didn't return as a victim of circumstances, but as a young man with renewed purpose. Before getting sick, Marcus shared in a school essay that was eventually published nationally, "I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but spending months in the hospital, seeing doctors, nurses, staff working tirelessly, and seeing how my mother fought to ensure I had the care I needed, changed something in me." He continued, "I decided I want to be a doctor, not just to treat diseases, but to treat people, to see patients as complete humans, not just cases, because Steph Curry saw my mother that way. And that saved not just our finances, it saved our spirit." You can sense that you're witnessing generational transformation when a 16-year-old boy articulates wisdom that many adults never reach. Marcus's essay was shared millions of times. And in response, Steph did something no one expected. He created a scholarship named in honor of Tiffany Williams. Not for himself, for her. The Tiffany Williams Scholarship for Resilience would offer complete education for 10 students annually. Not those who had the best grades or most athletic achievements, but those who had faced severe adversity and persisted despite everything. Like Tiffany, the announcement said, people who carry impossible weight but never stop fighting. People who are strong not because they want to be, but because they have no choice. And people who deserve to know they're not alone. Marcus would be the first recipient, but his path to medical school was now completely guaranteed. And he wouldn't be just any doctor. He would be one who understood, at a visceral level, what it means when the system almost fails you. Tiffany, for her part, transformed as well. Not that she had stopped working hard, but there was a lightness in her now that didn't exist before. A smile that reached her eyes, an ability to breathe without constant weight, suffocating every moment. "I still work for Steph," she said in an interview a year later, "but the relationship has changed. I'm not just an assistant. I'm family, and that makes every day mean something different. Because I'm not just executing tasks, I'm contributing to something bigger." It was impossible not to notice how that change in their dynamic had become a model for others. Because what Steph had done wasn't just isolated kindness. It was a challenge to the status quo of how we see work and human value. Sometimes, the strongest people show us that true greatness is treating everyone like family. Naturally, this leads us to the broader impact that the story had on corporate culture and beyond. Because 3 years after that initial moment, studies began documenting a fascinating phenomenon. Research from Stanford University revealed a 43% increase in companies implementing family crisis funds for employees. Programs modeled directly after what Steph had initiated. The Curry-Williams story changed conversations in boardrooms, the study concluded. It was no longer about public relations. It was about genuine recognition that employees have complex lives, and that when a company invests in those lives, everyone prospers. CEOs began appearing at conferences not to talk about profits, but about implementations of employee wellness programs inspired by the story. "We created a $5 million fund for staff emergencies," a Fortune 500 CEO announced. And you know what happened? Productivity increased 28%. Turnover dropped 40%. Because when people know you really care, they give everything they have. Another added, "We used to see employees as resources." Tiffany's story reminded us they're humans, with families, with battles. And when we treat them that way, magic happens. How is it possible that one story can reconfigure how an entire society thinks about work and human dignity? The answer lay in the specificity of that moment. It wasn't abstract, it wasn't theoretical, it was Tiffany, a real person with a real son facing a real crisis. And Steph, a person with real resources making a real choice to see humanity over hierarchy. That made it impossible for others with resources to ignore. Because if you had a platform, if you had means, and you chose not to see the people around you, well, now you were consciously choosing that. Business schools incorporated the case into curricula. The Curry-Williams model of compassionate leadership became a framework taught at Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. "It's the perfect study," a Harvard professor explained, about how true leadership isn't about commanding. It's about seeing, about recognizing the humanity of those who enable your success, and about acting when you see need. But perhaps the most profound impact was on ordinary people. People without millions. People who would never have the resources to pay a six-figure hospital bill. But who could apply the fundamental lesson? See the people around you. A grassroots movement emerged. See your assistant. Not just executive assistants, but anyone in a support role. Receptionists, cleaning crew, store attendants. Anyone whose work is often invisible but essential. I started asking my barista's name. One man posted, 9 years buying coffee. Never knew his name. Today, I asked. He cried. Said no one treats him like a person, just like a function. That broke me. I work in an office building, another person shared. Cleaning crew comes at night. We never see them. So I left notes, thanking them, and food. The next week, one of them sought me out crying. Said in 15 years, no one had ever thanked him. Have you ever wondered how many people around you carry invisible weight, waiting for someone to finally ask if they're okay? The movement grew, not with large organization or funding, but with people simply choosing to see the humanity of those often treated as invisible. Restaurants began implementing policies where customers could contribute to employee emergency funds. Every extra tip goes to a fund that helps our staff with crises. Apartment buildings created community funds for maintenance and security teams. The people who keep our buildings safe deserve to know we're here when they need us. Even schools began teaching children. Everyone matters. Not just teachers and principals, but cafeteria staff, janitors, bus drivers. Everyone has stories. See them. 5 years after that day in the office, the change was measurable. Not just in corporate policies, but in cultural consciousness. Opinion? Research revealed 81% of people said the Tiffany Williams story had changed how they thought about treating people in service roles, and 67% reported changing specific behavior as a result. I ask names now, I make eye contact, I say thank you, and really mean it. I leave bigger tips because I understand. They have lives, children, battles. I created a fund in my small business to help employees with emergencies. Only 5 people, but they're all family. What's most striking is how Tiffany and Steph remained fundamentally unchanged by the attention. There were no books, no speaking tours, no attempts to monetize the moment. Steph continued playing basketball. Tiffany continued doing her job exceptionally well. But the relationship between them had become something that modeled an alternative for how work could function. People ask me all the time, Tiffany said years later, if I feel strange being famous for that moment. But I don't feel famous. I feel seen. And there's a huge difference, she continued, because for 8 years I was good at my job, but invisible as a person. And that day, when I finally broke, Steph saw me. And that changed everything. Not just financially, emotionally. Steph, when asked about the legacy he hoped to leave, always returned to the same theme. I may have championships and records, he said. But if my legacy is that I showed people everyone deserves dignity, that treating humanity over hierarchy is strength, not weakness, then that matters more than any ring. Naturally, this leads us to understand that true legacy isn't in a singular act, but in how that act replicates through generations. Marcus was now in medical school, top of his class. Not because he was smarter than others, but because he had a motivation many didn't have. He knew what it was like to almost lose everything, and what it meant when someone chose to see his humanity. I'm going to be a different kind of doctor, he said in an interview during his first year. Not just because Steph Curry paid for my education, but because I saw how the system can fail families, how good people can fall through cracks, not because they're not strong enough, but because the system isn't built to catch them. I'm going to change that, he continued, with a conviction that belied his age. I'm going to treat every patient as if they were my mother, as if I understood that behind every case is a family, is love, is someone fighting harder than anyone knows. And so, the legacy continued, not just in policies or programs, but in how the next generation understood human value. Teachers reported a change in how students talked about careers, not just, I want to be rich or I want to be famous, but I want to make a difference. I want to see people. I want to be like Steph Curry was for Tiffany Williams. How is it possible that one simple act of seeing someone can resonate through generations? The answer lay in the universality of that moment. Because we're all Tiffany in some aspect of our lives, carrying weight no one sees, hoping someone will finally ask if we're okay. And we can all be Steph, choosing to see humanity, choosing to act when we see need, choosing to treat others like family. 10 years after that day, when retrospectives were written about the moment, the consensus was clear. It wasn't about money. It was about recognition, about dignity, about refusing to accept that some lives matter less than others. The Curry-Williams story, a cultural historian wrote, will be remembered not as a story about a celebrity doing charity, but as a moment when society confronted its own treatment of invisible workers and decided to do better. Tiffany, now Chief Operating Officer for all of Steph's companies, looked back with the clarity that comes with distance. That day in the office, she reflected, changed my life in obvious ways. Marcus is healthy, financial stability, a career I love. But what really changed was internal. I learned that strength isn't carrying everything alone. It's having the courage to be vulnerable. It's allowing others to see you. It's accepting help not as weakness, but as recognition that we all need each other. She paused before adding, and I learned that when you work for someone who truly sees you as human, everything changes. It's no longer just work, it's purpose. Steph, now retired from basketball, but still deeply involved in philanthropy, had his own reflection. People thank me for helping Tiffany, he said, but they have it all wrong. Tiffany helped me. She showed me that all the success I achieved was possible because she was carrying weight silently. And when I finally saw that, when I really understood, it changed how I see everything. It's not about being a hero, he continued. It's about being human. It's about recognizing that none of us gets where we are alone, and that when we have resources, we have responsibility, not legal responsibility, moral responsibility to see the people who brought us there. Sometimes, the strongest people teach us that true greatness isn't about what we accomplish, but about who we help along the way. Years passed. Marcus became a doctor. He specialized in pediatric oncology. And when asked why he chose that particularly challenging specialty, his answer was simple. Because I know what it's like to be a scared child with a disease I don't understand. And I know what it's like to have a mother who would do anything to save you. I want to be there for families like ours, not just as a doctor, but as someone who understands. Tiffany continued working with Steph, but the relationship had evolved into something that transcended employer-employee. They were family, true family, born not of blood, but of choice, of being present, of seeing each other through the lens of complete humanity. And when asked what they wanted people to remember about the story, both returned to the same point. See people, Tiffany would say. Really see, not just functions or roles, but humans with stories and battles and dreams. Treat everyone like family, Steph would add, because in the end, that's what matters. Not how many games you won or how much money you made, but how you treated people along the way, especially those society says matter less. The story of Tiffany Williams and Steph Curry became more than a viral moment. It became a modern myth about what it means to be truly great, about how greatness isn't measured by achievements, but by character. Not by how much you accumulate, but by how much you lighten the load of others. And perhaps, most importantly, it became a constant reminder. In a world that often treats people as disposable, choosing to see humanity is a revolutionary act. Choosing to act when you see need is real heroism. Choosing to treat everyone, especially those in roles society makes invisible, as family, that's a legacy that reverberates through generations. Because in the end, it's not about that moment in an office when a rich man paid a bill for an employee. It's about what that moment represented. A refusal to accept that some lives matter less. A decision to see complete human value in everyone. A commitment to act on that vision in tangible and meaningful ways. That little 16-year-old boy in a hospital bed received more than treatment that day. He received a future. And his mother, the woman who had carried the world alone for so long, finally learned she didn't have to. That sometimes asking for help isn't weakness. That sometimes letting others be strong for you is the greatest strength of all. And that sometimes the strongest people are those who have the courage to finally let the weight be shared. Forever.